Sometimes a small, even a tiny change can start a chain reaction. This is exactly what happened with StarCraft 2 Balance when patch 1.4.3 was released. Many people overlooked the importance of it, and yet the experience of all players changed drastically very soon. After all, it was just a tiny speed and range change for the Zerg race. What could go wrong? Let's take a better look at the whole situation. For the first 2.5 years, the Zerg race was having difficulties winning tournaments. And if you watch matches from the early days of Wings of Liberty, you'll see that the metagame was very different from what it is now. You can take a look at my Fruit Dealer or Bit by Bit story on this channel, for example. Most matches with Zerg players would include weird 2-3 base pushes and even more strange unit compositions. While the Zerg race had no problems in the late game or mid game, there were significant issues in the very beginning. It was very hard to survive until the race gets really good, and there were two distinct reasons for that. The first is, Zerg race had no reliable scouting tools. Terran players could rely on scans to see anything on the map, and Protoss players could use observers. While both these methods are not great either, the problem is, the Zerg race is the passive one. It's the race that reacts to what the other players are doing, and it was crucial especially with all-ins and cheeses that were dominant during that period. So to put it simply, it was historically hard for Zerg players to lead in a match and to show initiative. While some players managed to set the pace for the game, many just couldn't.
Zerg cannot scout. Marines can prevent Overlord scouting if you are at all careful about it, and it's not a huge investment. You just need 2 or 3 Marines on the perimeter. And wall-ins block any kind of ground scouting. Zerglings, drones can't get in.
The small change of Overlord speed allowed most Zerg players to get just enough information to understand what their opponents were doing. It made it easier to counter proxies, cheeses, all-ins, and overall provided more information to Zerg players, which in return increased the chances of a proper response to any kind of strategy. But that change alone wasn't enough, especially in the ZVT matchup. See, most Terrans figured out that the Zerg race doesn't have a big variety of ranged units in the beginning, and it struggles against Hellion pressure. It's very hard to counter them with pure links, and Queen's range was just laughable. They couldn't properly shoot at the Terran units. Hence, most Zerg players had to build roaches to defend from that, but it's a big investment early on, and the Zerg economy has to grow faster, otherwise it gets too hard to win. Moreover, roaches suck at the mid-game, and especially against Bio-Terrans, so it was just a waste of resources. Queen range fixed this issue, and now you could properly hold most attacks with links, queens, and sometimes banelinks, which made the game for Zergs a lot more straightforward. The developers and testers couldn't even imagine what evil they've just unleashed with those changes. Fast forward 7 months from the patch, Zerg players were literally everywhere. They would infest every tournament with their presence, and even the obviously worst players could now take maps easily in the late game against guys who had much more experience and skill level. Of course, most Zergs wouldn't admit the balance was in their favor, and they would say something like, just play like Pro Gamer X, but surprise surprise, there were almost no players from the Terran race at the World Championship. But what really happened? How did it go from Zerg being the worst race to the most overpowered race ever? Did those tiny changes affect the game so badly? In short, yes, they did. The one small part that was completely overlooked was the late game stage. Zerg players had Broodlord and Infestors, and this composition was pretty much untouchable. While Broodlords were not that hard to counter, the Infestors were the real pain for most players.
The Broodlords coming out now, and they're doing a great job here. Look at a perfect arc of nice spreader invested Terrans. I do believe we are about to have our second finalist here in the GSL.
Oh, GG!
GG!
Unlike nowadays, the fungal growth ability was instant, making it almost impossible to escape the shot. There just was no projectile. Zerg players could almost freeze the opponent's army for the whole 8 seconds, and the ability also had the bonus damage against armored units, such as Vikings, for example. But on top of that, Infestors also had infested Terrans, whom you could give free upgrades, and they would just obliterate anything from flying units to ground ones. So what happened is, more and more Zerg players could survive till the very late game, where it took little effort to win against really good players, especially in ZVT matchup. Most Terran players were now on the clock, and they had to finish the game until the Zerg players reached Hive Tech and got his first Broodlords and Infestors. While it was still possible to win, it was considerably harder to do so, and the win rate was around 60 or even 70% in favor of Zerg players at that stage of the game. Despite that, there were still some Terran heroes who managed to pull it off consistently.
27%
Broodlords here.
For Nestea. How many Vikings do we have on the map? We have 14 Vikings
14
and 18
Vikings,
ghosts.
I do not know if there's any way that MVP can even kill off this army quickly enough. Nestea still has so much money rallied. And there, Nestea now sees the front line of MVP. MVP now knows what he is up against.
Here we go, Sean.
The unit count is ridiculous, and I think Nestea's realizing he may have overproduced massive amounts of cloak. Now stepping forward, we see the Infestors starting to work forward. Snipes galore.
There's the snipe. Oh, look at
MVP! Broodlords continuing to rip through absolutely everything. The food counts.
Sniping every single Broodlord.
Oh my
Has
goodness!
MVP done it, Sean?
MVP crushed in the winners bracket finals. Now has just forced a 41-minute game with nukes, snipes.
GG! MVP wins!
MVP!
So as a Terran, you needed to finish quickly, but what about the Protoss race? Oh, there the situation was actually a bit more complicated. Protoss units are more chunky, and they don't die because of a single or two fungal growths like Marine do. However, the question was, how can I get the Broodlords down? It was very hard to reach them, and as you know, fungal prevents stalkers from blinking. This is when pro players came with two solutions. The first one was widely used in the late game, but it was basically a coin flip. The mothership had a special ability called Vortex. It would suck all the units, including the allied ones, in it for a couple of seconds. And while it didn't do any damage, the goal of the ability was simple. You just cut half of your opponent's army, deal with the rest, and then destroy what's left from the Vortex. However, the best way to use it was the Archon Toilet. A Protoss player would sink 4 or 6 Archons in there, and when units get out of the Vortex, they are all clumped up together. AoE damage of Archons just annihilates the whole Zerg or even Terran army. Here are the examples.
Kiwikaki's been loading a little sides. Here it goes.
Oh, here we don't go. Here we go now for sure.
There's the fungal.
Look at the fungals
All the
on
units are
everything.
revealed.
Oh, is he going to jump in there though? No, the Archon's not jumping in. The mothership just getting a little bit aggressive.
Oh, he got a second one. He got a second one.
The Archons are not jumping in. Oh,
there they
goes
are. There they
one.
are.
And
1.5 seconds, and then the Archons will come back. Stefano trying to get away, but the Colossi
the
are
army.
doing so much damage.
Oh man, everything bunched up right there, and I think Kiwikaki, is he going to have enough? Is he going to take out the Broodlords?
There are so few Broodlords left, just a couple left remaining on the field, and then it's all ground forces.
Kiwikaki's got it!
He's got it! He's got it! He's got it! Kiwikaki takes out the last Broodlord! Oh my God!
27 supply right now for Stefano. Stefano trying to make some units, but it is over, guys. Kiwikaki is winning.
Wow!
Oh, I can't believe that!
Oh my God!
Wow.
I mean, does he have enough Archons to actually do that? You have to deal so much damage with Archons. I mean, the VCs have so much health. And he's just pushing, man. He's like, all right, let's do it. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. But no Archons. Where's his Archons? He needs to get those in there.
He cut down the Archons before it was time.
And the Void Rays come out. And Archon goes in. Archon goes in. Get in there. Oh my God, what are we seeing? The other side storm. This is madness.
Oh my God,
is he actually going to kill this army? Oh, the BCs are all going down. I can't believe what I just saw. Oh my God. And he still has a huge amount of supply on that island. What? MVP has no money left. Squirtle just won that game.
But as you guessed, it could be prevented by just splitting your units, and this tactic relied heavily on the element of surprise. It wasn't a very reliable way of winning games. And then the Protoss race was gifted with Barting's genius mind. This Korean player didn't enjoy late game as much, so he came up with a special strategy that would stop Zerg players from even getting to that late game stage. It was the so-called Soul Train, or in other words, Immortal Sentry All-in.
Yeah, he's just waiting a little bit longer. He wants to make sure he has that pylon up. We talked about it before, but that pylon is so critical. Without the pylon, you can't use the Warp Prism to lift your Immortals. You have to actually micro without it.
He has 13 sentries. This is so many force fields. If you have Infestors against this, you just see them pop like pimples, but we don't have Infestors. We have Roaches, we have Zerglings, and once again, those force fields are brilliant.
Harding is the Warp Prism pilot here. He's dropping the Immortals out. This is looking so scary because the production is severely affected by the fact he doesn't have that 30 hatch. He has no macro hatch, and he's got roaches dying already. He can't afford to lose these without force fields being dropped. 2 more roaches go down.
And
Life, get yourself together.
The third base is done, and here comes Parting with the force fields. They are brilliant, and they trap everything. The supply is dropping for the StarTale Zerg plays down to 120, and Parting with the patience that he is known for. He's moving slowly
He takes
up
the lead
the
in supply, and he's going to be able to take out these roaches. The Overlords are in danger as well. GG!
This tactic suggested that you need to wall off yourself on 2 bases and hit with this deadly attack at around minute 9. You should have around 3 mortals, 9 to 11 sentries, plus 1 attack, upgrade, and a war prism with zealots or stalkers to support you and to micro your immortals. The beauty of this tactic, even if the Zerg realized early on what he's up against, it was still very hard to counter. Ravagers simply didn't exist at that time, and you had no way to break the force fields except by baiting the Protoss to use them and then retreat. Another option was to do a 360 degree surround, but Protoss players were kinda aware of that and tried to execute the build carefully. So if the Protoss could micro perfectly and place ideal force fields, he would win the match no matter how much army Zerg had. The rest of 2012 Esports StarCraft 2 since May was revolving around that game between Protoss and Zerg players. Most tournaments would feature either a lot of ZVZ or some ZVPs with nail-biting outcomes, while Terrans were cast aside and only made guest appearances somewhere in the top 32 or even lower. Of course, it wasn't the case for all players, but for the majority it was a big problem. While it was even entertaining for some time, soon the game pretty much stalled and became too obvious and boring to watch. It was either about timing counterattacks or about a random vortex ability. There was just nothing new or creative in the game, and it was very annoying to play on the ladder. You had only one way for each race, and it was incredibly tiresome and boring. People would leave and abandon StarCraft 2, the view numbers dropped too. And ZVZ was still interesting, but come on, who even likes watching mirror matches all the time? Even I am, as a Zerg, didn't really like that back in the past.
They survived to get to that point. They would get to that point, and the Terran and Protoss players would go, I don't know what to do. What do I do? And people would also look to the stats. They'd be like, well, PVZ is 50-50, so it's perfectly balanced. And then ignore the like Broodlord Infestor versus Vortex bullshit. Or no, 2-base Immortal Sentry, that's what it was.
Archon Toilet!
Broodlord Infestor was absolutely bullshit. It turned a lot of people off from StarCraft.
It was also somewhat annoying to Zerg players too. Even if you were a decent player, you would be called PATCHZERG for every victory you get. There was a surge of new Zerg players who started appearing at tournaments, but they quickly disappeared for some reason after this unit composition was nerfed. For example, the community often called PATCHZERGS players such as Johnny Recco, Slivko, or even Stefano himself. Eventually, after pretty much 10 months of Zerg dominance, this balance deal came to an end, and Broodlord Infestor composition was a lot less viable due to many changes, mainly because the Fungal got nerfed and other races had new means of pushing the Zerg race and preventing from obtaining the Death Ball. Little did people know that they've just entered a new awful balanced metagame with swarm hosts and camping, but that's already a different story. By the way, check out The Longest Game with Mon and Firecake to learn more about that balanced struggle. And that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this video, have a nice day, and see you next time.